Welcome, Wargamers, to the thrilling conclusion of the Broken Realms saga. As the realms themselves tremble, the mountains topple, armies rise and fall, and a new edition of the realms begins its dawn. I am Doug with 2+ Tough, and if you're just tuning into this series, I would truly highly encourage you to go back and start from the beginning with Broken Realms Marath, and for bonus credit, Wrath of the Everchosen. Because the events that we're going to talk about do happen in a linear fashion. And I'm going to be assuming that you're up to date because, quite honestly, to backtrack on every reference and that kind of thing, it would just make me go insane. And right at the top, I want to make it very clear, Games Workshop, thank you so much for sending me an advanced copy of Broken Realms Kragnos, because then I have enough time to get these videos together for you, the viewer, as the book is launching. Now, before we really begin Act 1 of this tale, the book starts with a bit of an introduction. Just like with Broken Realms Bellicor, Broken Realms Kragnos doesn't start by focusing on its main character. Or I should say, the person the book is named after. This little snippet, this short story, takes place in Ghyran, at the rotted base of the Oak of Ages Past, one of the few great remnants of the world that was. Simply put, it's a massive tree that sailed through the void after the old world ended and landed here in Ghyran. Alarielle and her Sylvaneth army are at the base of the tree, purging it of beastmen and maggotkin forces in preparation for a very, very unique ritual. The battle that's described is pretty cool, and honestly, there's a lot of cool parts in it for only lasting about 2 pages. Like I said, this is a bit of a preamble to the actual story. The Nurgle units here have repaired the Dirge Horn, which is a great throwback to the Rumgate Wars. If you weren't around back then, that's totally cool. Basically, imagine a giant horn, like think like a giant didgeridoo, but the blast that it puts out, the sound, anything that's in earshot of it, which is miles and miles, it basically fills you with despair. It's how Nurgle crushed the hearts of mortals before he even started to corrupt them as he was making his grand entrance into Ghyran. Well, in the Rumgate Wars it was destroyed, but here it has been reconstituted. It's been put back together. What's interesting to note, though, is that it does say it took the time period between it being destroyed and at least, them knowing about it or maybe repairing it was over 100 years. So we do have some some inkling of how much time it took to rebuild. So this massive army of Sylvaneth, led by Alarielle, descends upon this location and just absolutely starts decimating the Nurgle forces. The whole time that she's doing this, Alarielle is focused on taking out, of course, the biggest enemy threats, while also singing her spirit song. The greater and greater her acts of violence, like putting down chaos forces, the more intense that her song gets. It's as if her call is building up, along with the calls of the other Sylvaneth around her. Now, if you don't know, just to kind of throw a little pin in this, the Spirit Song is basically a supernatural communication web that connects and binds all of the Sylvaneth. They can't always hear each other, like realm to realm, there's just too much distance, but all of them can always at any point hear Alarielle's. So this is her main way of doing things on a grand scale with all of her people, meaning the Sylvaneth, right? That's her particular faction. Well, during this ritual, she begins losing Sylvaneth to the Chaos forces, and while each death pains her, they are necessary sacrifices because we soon learn that the Oak of Ages Past is being reawoken with each sacrifice that's made above it. The soul stuff of the Sylvaneth, normally they can be replanted and reblossom into a new Sylvaneth creature. When it hits the ground near the Oak of Ages sucks it right in. So this combination of getting soul energy from the Sylvaneth combined with the rapture of the Spirit Song nursed this relic of another world back to life. And hey, as a cameo, Drycha is even here, and she's doing her part to keep the Nurgle forces at bay. She's just hacking and slashing and having a wonderful time. Why? I don't really have a great reason as to why she's there, but other than to say, girls just want to have fun, and that's cool. When at last the ritual is complete, a blast of pure Ghyran energy bows out. It's actually described very much like the Necroquake was, honestly, how it had a bowing wave that just kind of basically, from that point of origin, just blew outward. The power of life magic itself boomed out from the now fully blossomed, tall enough to scrape the heavens itself tree, and it undoes much of the corruptive force of Nurgle across Ghyran, although not entirely, it's still lingering, but it travels along the spirit song as well. So as she's raising this crescendo of a song, this moment of, I'm going to call it like a detonation of life magic happens, and it carries along the spirit song. And in this way, it is very strongly written, indicated and made very clear, this is going to be traveling to just about every realm. Now here's where things get a little weird. I'm kind of on board for it, but if you don't like the weird fantasy stuff for Age of Sigmar, buckle up. The Oak of Ages Past is now fully bloomed. This is basically the giant, tree of life that was in Athelloren from the world that was. And on it, it starts to grow these little golden acorns. I don't know if they're actually gold or like they just kind of like, hey, would say like a golden crust kind of a thing on bread. But these golden acorns fall to the earth, and where they touched, the realm of life was truly supreme. There was no sting of death magic, because remember, the Necroquake poured death magic over every corner of every realm. So it literally just evaporates that power. And the power of Nurgle, the corruption of chaos, it still lingered in the realm, but it could not be anywhere near these points. These were places of pure life. And from there, the Warsong Revenants rose. Now these are the new Sylvaneth model we got with this release. The kind of super flute player that's sort of like acts as a herald of Alarielle. And with their instruments, they echoed the same powerful spirit song as Alarielle, which is very interesting because, as we know, Alarielle's spirit song can go realm to realm, but other Sylvaneth can't. So the idea of like them tuning into her frequency, so to speak, they can now go out and carry that note with them. So now they are truly bringing the life magic boom everywhere. Like any location that the song that they were playing was heard, life thrived, death receded, and corruption fizzled away. Now at this point, Alarielle's part of the story pauses. But the effects of this ritual on the setting are detailed in a poetry-like section, or it's kind of written like a poem, immediately after it. Simply put, this was the Necroquake of life magic to some extent. Not quite as all-encompassing or immediate, but a big bowing wave of life magic rippled across Ghyran, and the Warsong Revenants carry it wherever they go, specifically traveling far and wide in every single realm. This little poem that we get, and I do encourage you to read it, I purposefully leave things out because I want you to go experience this book for yourself, but it basically breaks down how this new wave of life magic is affecting every single realm. It breathes healing and purity and abundant life into each and every place, which sounds great. It sounds like, oh, everything's better now. It's not always good. Like, for example, like in Akshi, fire spirits just were instantly born and start walking around setting things on fire. Like, it's true, unfiltered life magic, which is good and bad. It's neutral. But specifically points out that the biggest area of effect, outside of Ghyran itself, of course, where this all takes place, is the realm of beasts, Ghur. A realm already teeming with life, predators and prey, where the natural features, even just cliffs and rivers and oceans, are almost living with their sentience, and they consume one another and they smash down and fight for supremacy. Within Ghur, the mountains sundered and split, and something hidden deep beneath them stirred. But that is just one story. One domino tipped that set off a chain of events that will dominate this entire week. And these initial videos to do whenever I crack open like a campaign book are a bit hard because it's a lot of like setting the stage, right? That's always what the first video is, so to speak. And so that's how I kind of want to round out this one, is setting the stage itself. So we saw Alarielle's actions, we get a faint idea that there's some consequences in Ghur, and then the perspective shifts the second we start getting into Act 1. The setting here is the city of Excelsis, the city of secrets, a bastion of order in a sea of monsters within the realm of beasts. So what I want to do with the rest of this video, so that we can have a fantastic week where we're all on the same page, is really paint a picture of what Excelsis is like now. One that doesn't show up in the Stormcast Eternals battle tome, because it's vitally important to understand what the city is like at the moment, because it's not, like I said, it's nothing like the battle tome. So at its base level, the city of Excelsis is an extremely interesting one. The main feature that dominates the city is called the Spear of Malice, a shard of the old world infused with magic, and it's basically jutting from the earth, sticking up like from the soil, almost like it was a splinter inside of an animal's paw. And this relic has some incredible properties. Specifically, if you touch a piece of it, you gain a measure of prophetic vision. A pebble will grant you small flashes and, images of possible futures. A fist-sized chunk can let you drift through the realm of possibilities to foresee great events. Now, of course, this resource is highly coveted by wizards and mystics whose ability to discern the future are their bread and butter, right? It's literally why they're in, political office or court or something like that. This resource is how Excelsis knows where to send its armies and how to fish and hunt most effectively. Like, they'll just go to wherever the fish are. They've foreseen where they're going to be. It's how they survive the ever-changing landscape of Gur and more. However, it is also the source of its many, many troubles. Servants of the Dark Gods, largely Tzeentch, covet this power. Of course, his people are the master of fates and it's their domain. In fact, if you want to kind of get amped for this series or this book or what the next step in the setting is going to be, there's a fantastic book called City of Secrets, which is the nickname, like I said, for the city, where a Tzeentch cult tries to seize control of it, and we'll talk more on that in a minute. One other thing to note about Excelsis before we go any further is that it is the home of the Knights Excelsior, a brutal storm host of the Stormcast Eternals. If you aren't familiar with the naming conventions, these are the Stormcast who have white armor with the gold trim, a little bit of blue highlights. And these guys are brutal. They have purged Excelsis more than once. I believe it's twice. They are exacting, they are uncompromising, and again, extremely brutal. This means that this city should, a caps lock on the word should, be well fortified, secure, and safe, but as we'll talk about, that is not the case. In that novel I recommended, The City of Secrets, like I said, there's an entire revolt. Tzeentch forces had infiltrated all ranks of the city and made their power play, while the bulk of the Stormcast were out fighting a greenskin army. If not for the coolest pair in AOS lore, Callus and Tull, they would have succeeded. But that book, as great of a story it is, I don't want to spoil anything, it actually is super fun to read if you're looking for a really good, self-contained adventure book that feels like the old world. I really cannot recommend it enough. But the one thing that book doesn't go into is kind of the aftermath of those events, right? They solve the problem, but there's consequences that aren't really driven into. But this story, at least the first act of Broken Realms Kragnos, gives us a sense of just how huge those events were. In short, this Tzeentch attack from the inside out broke the city. There are entire districts that are zoned off and quarantined where endless spells move on their own whim because there's just literally not enough infrastructure left to stop them. Politicians and civic leaders were revealed as Tzeentch acolytes, and then there were some, other people who are important to the organization of the city, that they didn't do anything wrong, but they were killed in the scuffle of all these things happening. There was a great purge of the leadership because no one could be trusted all of a sudden because of the duplicitous nature of Tzeentch. And so the law cracked down hard. Misuse of magic or foresight in any way is subject to the harshest punishments, even death. And if you read the events of that book, you can kind of understand this, but it was such a traumatic event for the entire city that there's this core idea that started to kind of whisper among the people who lived there that magic is what got them in this mess, right? And so the City of Prophecy, all of a sudden, had this strong anti-magic coalition of its citizens. People who want to live in Gur, but they don't care about the stupid Spear of Malice sticking out of the ground. They're like, I just want to live. I'm just a fur trader. Or, I work in hunting or fishing or, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of reasons to be in Gur that have nothing to do with the Spear of Malice. So you don't need to read City of Secrets, but we get the picture of this city is a direct result of that. Because this anti-magic group is collectively known as the Nolstone Brotherhood. If you don't know, Nolstone is sort of like a realm stone, like a magic rock or whatever, where it basically shuts down magic. right? Null, meaning nothing happens. Stone, it's pretty simple. It can be worn as a pendant or jewelry or something like that. And this group went from a bunch of like murmuring amongst discontent citizens to a fully militarized, I guess, version of like a neighborhood watch, and it's infected every strata of Excelsis society, doing their own witch hunt, so to speak, on many magic wielders. And they even kind of built up their own mythos, their own little religion about this, the Nolstone Brotherhood. They even have saints, and one of them is Odo Malgin. He's going to be a very important character throughout this week. And the picture that's presented of them is somewhat like flagellants, right? Crude people who have given up any form of luxury and let vengeance and street justice dominate their lives. They're not, fighting in the name of Sigmar, but they will put Nolstone into their bodies, like piercings and that kind of stuff, wear it all over themselves, and act like wild men who are just obsessed with hunting and rooting out any type of magic user. Now, I can see why this reaction exists, right? It's true, overuse of the Spear of Malice and associated magics did, in fact, get them into a near-extinction level event. You might call it a dilly of a pickle. And so it seems very reasonable to me that there would at least be some people who are like, alright, no more magic. But that intensity over time has turned into zealotry, and zealotry, my friends, has a dark side to it. Namely, is the persecution of elves within Excelsis. Basically, members of the Nolstone Brotherhood, which is a group that is constantly expanding, like I said, it's in all levels of society, have begun targeting elves who are known to be more naturally adept at magic, or at least wielding it. Elves will be hassled in the streets, their vendor carts flipped at markets, heinous slurs and beatings, and as of recent, when the story kind of takes place, many have simply begun disappearing. Nolstone Brotherhood members kidnapping their neighbors simply because of who they are. Now, of course, the elves here do not take this lying down, right? It's a port city. You've got scourge privateers, wanderers, and a whole bunch of stuff. They work in the guard and all these things. These are not like meek characters. So when an elf goes missing and a scourge privateer thinks he knows who did it, they'll straight up flail them to death in broad daylight. And there's this whole system of like, what about X starts up? Right? You can see the two different groups within the city fighting at each other. It's like, well, what about this missing elf? Who cares about that? You beat my guy to death over it. Yeah, because he took somebody else. And it just kind of like, well, you did blank. Well, you did blank. And it goes back and forth. But the city is such a wreck with so many threats that there's not really much to manage. It's like a powder keg without anyone who can cut the fuse. Now, trying their hardest to regain order and control, the city leaders have called in heroes from the Order of Azir, mostly to hunt out the endless spells within the city, but also these city leaders are using the Spear of Malice to foresee how they should get things back on track. Again, the Nolstone Brotherhood is like a citizen militia type thing where they personally want to see magic stopped, but that doesn't technically make it, one, illegal, and it doesn't stop city leaders from using it because that's the only way that they know how to solve their problems at this point. They're like, what paths of the future can we take to try and, right this ship? The problem is, all the prophecies they see are like terrible news. Right, everything they foresee is like this city falling to ruins in a myriad of different ways. There's Skaven and vermin overrunning the streets. They see kind of like a dark looming presence over it. Then there's a green giant foot stomping out all life and more. And right there at the very end of what I would consider the introduction to the first act, when we're talking about the nature of the city and kind of its state of turmoil, we get one more glimpse into the fate of Excelsis. It is revealed after they've introduced the Nolstone Brotherhood that it is corrupted from within. Basically, what started as a completely reasonable reaction to a frustration the citizens were having, hey, magic is ruining the city, shut it down, has at some point become a den for Slaanesh worshippers. See, they've been stealing mirrors from around the city. And those elves that go missing, they're kidnapping them and bringing them to this central point. They have a little, basically, enclave set up within one of the quarantined and restricted zones that they shouldn't be in. They've made this little room that's full of mirrors, and they bring the elves in there and then kill them. The idea being, from the Nolstone Brotherhood's perspective, I want elves to see what their hubris in magic wielding brings them, right? That's like their punishment. But in fact, this plan has been whispered into their minds, specifically of Odo Malgan, where, this is the thing that we want to have happen. So there are powers outside of Excelsis driving these people who are slowly falling to Slaanesh without even knowing it to do all these terrible things. So we get that little glimpse into, like, things are far more messed up than you might imagine. Now, the dream's importance of all these different fates of destruction have become so bad that the entire city's leadership has basically become very, very numb to it. They just kind of like make do, and they just walk around the city that's on the brink of self-destruction or destruction from outside, and all the while threats line up to take down one bit of order amongst the lands of beasts. But that, friends, is where I want to pause with the story, with the stage set, and we'll be going into what ill fates await the City of Secrets later on this week. So as with all my videos, let's talk about why this is so cool. First of all, I want to kind of touch on Alarielle's mini-story at the beginning. We get the sense that rather than her making a power play for total supremacy like Nagash was doing, this is sort of a more natural reaction to Nagash's spell, right? First, entropy was ascendant within Girian because Nurgle was rotting everything, but then death became ascendant. When Nagash hit the Necroquake, all of the rotting and that kind of stuff, a lot of it stopped because now death magic was ascendant. It actually put a dampering on Nurgle's power there. With that phase gone, the Soul Wars one done, now in the natural life cycle of the realm, it's time for life to bloom once again. It's just the right time. So yeah, she created this new unit, the Warsong Revenant, that's armed with her spirit song, which is huge and you can't minimize that. But it's not like she was making a play to conquer all the realms herself just like Nagash did. It's the balance of power. And this is Alarielle's moment of power. And the tone for this is overall very optimistic, which we don't get a lot of in Age of Sigmar, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's just like, the darkness is past, it's time for life to bloom again. And that's a wonderful way to like set up these events where we have thriving armies in a place where life never really went away. Like, Gur is a location where the Age of Chaos was just like adding more people to a fun party, right? All the orcs and the ogres and that kind of stuff, they all loved it. They were just like, this is the best. The Warsong Revenants are pretty cool. Their birth was a great way to introduce a new unit. Essentially, they are somewhat made from the souls of elves from the old world that were basically sealed inside the Oak of Ages Past. Athelorn of the Wood Elves from Fantasy Battles was given a name drop. Thought that was pretty cool. And the aftermath of the City of Secrets, that book I was talking about, is actually very fascinating. Kind of moving on to the next part of the story here. The overcaution that led to the bigotry of elves, against them, is fascinating. And that kind of mentality and worldview, to me, make this feel like a very real place. Like, you start off with an idea of like, hey, we should tone it down on the magic. Things got real when Tzeentch showed up. And then some people just take it to an extreme, and of course now there's like demonic whispers and that kind of stuff, and you can see how what is a reasonable reaction, it might be the wrong one, I think it's the wrong one, but it's reasonable to say ease up on magic, turns into something that is like super dark when you take it to the extreme. And I find this story so fascinating because of that I'm actually very tempted to do my own Stormcast army as Knights Excelsior, but I don't know, we'll see. I can see how you can say like, magic is the root problem, but also you need it. Like, it actively helps you survive in the realm of beasts. So like, it's not all bad. Where all of that stuff takes a dark turn is the witch hunt for an entire population portion, right? Just elves. Ignorance and bigotry are a deadly combination. And with the looming threats that they do see, like, they don't know about the Nolstone Brotherhood's connection to a darker power. The people in the Nolstone Brotherhood don't know they're being manipulated, but they are. But for the things that they do know are coming, like, there's no room for like an internal, witch hunt going on. This is an all hands on deck moment for the city, but most of them don't have the scope to understand it. They don't have the perspective to see just how dire things are. And so this is the powder keg that we are going to spend the next week blowing up and picking through the remains in detail. And friends, I hope you join me. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Tell me your thoughts in the description or the comments down below. I'd love to read them. And I will catch you next time in my next video. Happy wargaming.